Everyone, good morning. I'm John Padley. I'm 24 years old. I work for Precision Pest Management Solutions. I'm based predominantly in the Nottinghamshire, South Yorkshire, and Derbyshire area. I won't be able to see anyone's comments or any questions, but if you just let the BPCA know, they'll be able to notify me. Okay, so it's a not too deceiving split. So about 65% of people have been in a service food factory, about 35% to 18 of you haven't. I would just consider it as being like a restaurant, just with a bit more to think about as you're doing any kind of treatment or routine inspection work. So we're going to jump in first with the risks of having a mouse get in, whether it be one mouse, a full-blown infestation, what the risks are to the factory and to associated aspects to the business. So the main one I would consider is the risk to product, whether it be a bakery product, a confectionery product, any kind of food products. If a mouse gets in, it's probably going to be what they're wanting to eat. You've got to bear in mind in a food factory, these contracts may be in the millions of pounds, tens, 15 million pounds. So any kind of damage to the product, if it gets rejected, that could cause issues between your client and their customer. You've got the risk of damage to packaging, which obviously, whilst it's less of a disease transmission risk, it can also cause disease transmission if it gets to the product. It can cause relationship issues between your client and their customer. It can also cause issues like product recall if it happens too often or there's a lot of damage, which can cost an absolutely humongous amount of money for anyone who is involved in that and can cause a lot of pain for your clients, which is probably going to come back on you at the end of it. You've also got damaging equipment, so that could be the manufacturing lines, the packing lines, overhead electrical trunking, cables, any kind of infrastructure in the factory. And I don't know if anyone's seen how much it costs for a factory to build new equipment, but it's not cheap. Like the last one I've seen cost about £2 million. So damaging that is going to cost them a lot of money, and that's not going to be a happy customer to you. You also have the risk to the factory's workforce. You could have disease transmission again. If the factory, for example, is a wet cleaning environment, there's water all over the floor, there's urine or droppings into it, that could cause leptospirosis to be spread, or hentavirus, or any other kind of disease that can be transmitted by rodents. But you've also got the contractors on site, visitors, or even an auditor if you're exceptionally unlucky. But you've also got the risk of business loss in all aspects of a factory. Any kind of rodent damage could impact your client's ability to perform business. They might lose a customer due to rodent damages, and that's going to cost them a lot of money, which is then going to highlight your service to them being the predominant reason why you're there in the first place. So if you've been called out at 7:30 in the morning and you're going over to this factory to deal with say a mouse has gotten in, doesn't matter where right now or to what extent, but you're going in to see what's going off. There's some very immediate considerations you might want to consider, especially once you get to the site and you find out where it's happening. So in terms of the location of the factory, is it on the outer parts of the factory, is it in the inner part, but also along the production line process, as it started at the point of raw materials being mixed, has it happened when the materials being used and made into the product, is it happening at the packaging end, or is it happening at dispatch? All these areas are quite pertinent to what you're going to do for your treatment in terms of how you can treat it, where the risks are, how extreme the risks are, and the options available to you in general as your treatment progresses. So you might want to also consider where your mouse is able to harbor. So it could be a really old factory, let's say it's 120 years old or something like that, and there's lots of cracks, nooks and crannies, damaged areas where mouse can squeeze in and hide. Or it could be brand new and there's no proofing issues whatsoever and you can't find any cracks or gaps. In which case, could it be under a pallet? Could it be hiding in a machine itself? These are all considerations you need to make. You could also consider how long the mouse has been there. So some factories might be a lot more proactive. They might be a little more relaxed. They have obviously their rules and when they have to go and check boxes. So BRC, I believe, is weekly. However, some factories may send people out daily, or they might have very obvious visualization checks to make sure things are going on. In whatever sense, if you can have an understanding as to how long this mouse has gotten in, you can work out if it's had time to get used to the factory or get used to the environment that it's in, which can also help amend your treatment plan. You want to consider the environment. So is it clean? Is the factory a really clean factory where food debris is cleaned up straight away? Or is it one where food kind of sits for a while and doesn't get cleaned up and you're often picking these up in your inspection reports? If that's the case, then there's going to be lots of food available to them. There could be water available to them. And you will want to address that as well as part of your integrated approach. But your biggest consideration must always be the rest of the product for whatever client it is. Because no matter what happens, that's the bit they are most interested in protecting. That's the bit you need to be interested in protecting too. So when you come to finding the pest, you're looking again for harbourage opportunities. It could be anywhere, it could be in the walls, it could be overhead in stanchions. Remember, mice are three-dimensional in their way of traveling. They don't have to walk along the floor. If they can get into a wall or cavity, they might find a way to climb, and they will happily run along overhead stanchions or any kind of overhead or ceiling-based infrastructure. You've got manufacturing equipment. Could they be hiding in there? It's happened. Could they be living in there? Could they be finding food and water in there? In which case they might not have as much of a need to move. You've got doors, so could they be going in and out of doors? Is it a dispatch area? Have you got a dispatch with non-automatic doors, or there's gaps underneath and they can run in and out all they want, and they may not actually be living in the factory? They could just be living outside and coming in. These are all considerations you're going to want to think about and find a way of testing to see if this is the case or not. You've also got building construction. A lot of older factories get built and they build on top and on top and on top, and then you get wall voids and cavities all over a factory. In which case, they're very easy harbourage points. If a mouse can get in, or a rat, or even SPI have been known to breed in cavities. If they can get into the cavity, they can use it, and then they're safe from being seen until they want to come out. And that can make things a lot more tricky. That's where you want to use things like tracking powder, tracking dust. I like fluorescent tracking points because I think they look cooler and it's easier to demonstrate. So you've got a monitor in a warehouse where you've got box shyness being demonstrated. And then you've also got one by the side of it, which is in a cooler area. So one major factor you need to consider within the food manufacturing environment, as opposed to, let's say, your restaurants and your cafes and your shops and your pubs, is that these guys are probably going to be audited. So they're going to have specifications. So that may include a number of bodies, including customers. And these will be checked. So everything you need to do needs to be clear and not only legal, but conforming with whatever specification your factory has. So it could be the British Retail Consortium, it could be Tesco's, it could be M&S, it could be Asda, Morrison's, it could be a lot of different auditors. But whoever they are, you need to know that what you're doing is in alignment with them. And you also have in some factories Kiwa, who is just an auditing body for pest control if you're not familiar, but they will audit everything from a pest controller's knowledge. So if you do anything what isn't in conformance with pest control rules or within their specifications, these guys will pick it up. So you want to make sure what you do conforms within these specifications. So when you come to treating the infestation, in whatever way it is, you need to adapt your controls and how you're going to do it to the situation in itself. We had an old factory. This is an office space way away from any food production. I think it's actually a satellite building. And they're using voids to come through, and they're getting through cracks and then traveling above the ceilings and into the offices and the canteen area. So we've had contact gel down and we've had traps in there. Everything's been documented. It's on site plans. And that's how we're controlling that. But that in itself is a unique way of treating areas because you can't get, it's not on ground level. You can't put boxes down. We're going to have to use traps and contact gel because these are box shy and they're bait shy, which is a bit of a double whammy, but here we are. So using ERD in your treatment is obviously fundamental, as we all know from our SPH2 or 3 or any other qualification you've taken in your pest control career. But when they're in, exclusion, you can't exclude it from a whole factory now because it's already in. But you might want to consider trying to exclude it from the rest of the factory. So let's say it's in a warehouse, for example. If you can make sure those doors are closed, those doors are sealed, the likelihood of that mouse getting into a production area or somewhere far, far more difficult to treat is a lot better. So can you isolate the mouse? Can you isolate it to a specific area of a building? Can you isolate it to a room? As much as possible, try and isolate it. If you think like a ship and they've got bulkheads, so there's a breach on one end, you can seal it off by section. Just as a way to prevent anything from the mouse from getting further and further into the factory than you already have it in. Can you also shut down the area? Is it an area where the factory doesn't need it for that period of time? Let's say you need as much time as possible. They can isolate that area. If it's a production area, you're probably not going to get that because obviously they're producing massive amounts of food that could represent millions to them. So you're not going to shut it down. But if it's an old office space or a random warehouse that they don't need because they've not got that much stock, you could potentially look to use that and isolate it away. And can you do any proofing work? I wouldn't proof into anywhere with cavities because they may be in the cavity and you want to deal with that first. But if you can proof them out from anywhere else, so internal proofing, that is always a very strong consideration to make. So the next one would obviously be restriction, if you think of your ERD principles. Can you remove food? So is it a warehouse? Can you remove the pallets, get them to get broken down and check to make sure nothing's in there already, and then remove them from the area? Also got the mouse activity or infestation. Can the food be relocated? Can it be going to another warehouse? Can it be taken somewhere out of the way so the mouse or mice can't get to it? Water sources. So in a warehouse, you're probably going to have an easier time with this. But if you're in a production area of a wet cleaning site, it's going to be more tricky. However, where possible, can you reduce water access? Can you ask for spillages to be cleaned up? Can you ask to reduce the amount of water used? It's going to be difficult, but if you can try and reduce water availability at any point, that would be advisable. And then you've got destruction, which is obviously your last port of call. But at this point, it's already in, so you're going to have to do it. Physical or chemical control. Traps is obviously a go-to. Rodenticides, you may need to get some kind of special dispensation for that, depending on your customers or your client's customers. But it may be something you just have to do at the end of the day, so they may have to seek that allowance from their customers. So moving on to treating the infestation, always take the pesticide to the pest, as I'm sure we've all heard from someone at some point. But look at the rodenticide formulations. So what can you use and what is allowed to be used? So you wouldn't put grain bait in a bakery, for example, but you might put soft blocks in a box somewhere where there's no open food. It may be you might have to because there's a big problem and you have to deal with it, in which case you'll need special dispensation, sorry. You're not going to get compensated for it. But you might need special dispensation. You may need to get your site's approval from technical teams, and you might need some kind of support from them in the process. Always use tracking gel and tracking powder. If you're not there for several days, you want to know what they've been doing, whatever this mouse or mice have been doing for that period of time. I like UV because if it's a factory where I do a lot of cleaning, there's a chance someone might clean up your UV tracking gel or tracking dust, and you might see some fragments left, which helps work out where they've gone, even if it has been washed away. But you can use non-fluorescent tracking powder and even flour if you really want to. And you can always use cameras if you want to go the extra mile there. If you've got the factory's permission to do so, you can install cameras so you can try and visually monitor for it and get an actual recording of where it's going to help coordinate your treatment. So you need to know your pest, ultimately. With mice, sporadic feeders is obviously a big one, but they could also have box shyness. I found that's becoming increasingly common in my area. Again, South Yorkshire down to Derbyshire with Nottinghamshire in between, sort of. Basically, top of the M1 from South Yorkshire to the bottom. Where the BPCA office is, actually. So where could they go? What are the mice looking for? Small cracks, small gaps, underneath pallets, in between pallets. They might find cavities. They might be able to exploit electrical infrastructure to travel around. That's been known. Have they had issues before? Mice and rats do follow urine scent trails. It's always a good shout to go and have a look and see what's going off where it happened before. And that way you can see if they're using the same trails. And this stuff can happen for years in the past. But it's always good to think 3D, not 2D at any point. You've also got breeding rates. Obviously, it's about 3 weeks. If it's warmer and the conditions are nicer, they might breed a bit quicker. Conversely, if it's a bit colder and the conditions aren't as good, it might be a little bit slower. But you want to keep an eye on that and make sure you're aware that there could be multiple generations as you go, depending on when you've taken this factory and what kind of problem you're dealing with. So again, the picture of the box, I quite liked that picture, so it's featured twice. How can the client help? In a food factory, you're going to have people who are at least pest awareness trained. For those of you who've looked after food factories, I'm sure you've done pest awareness training before. You may even have staff with RSPH2 training. So in which case you've got a whole arsenal of staff who are there every single day or 5 days or whatever their shift pattern is, who can also support you in your treatment. So you could be speaking to the hygiene team, who may be your point of contacts. It could be the technical management or the technical team. It could be someone in quality. It could be anyone in the factory who is designated to support pest control. You can discuss things with them. You can have them go around and check monitors whilst you're away. So my factories have UV torches. So I have UV tracking points down and they will check in between if needed, if there's ever an incident. And that way, whilst I'm on site to do the follow-ups and whatever risk assessment manner I'm doing it, they can check in between. So if I'm not back for 2 days or 3 days, they can check on those days between. That way we've got a day-by-day account of what's going on. You've got ISPH level 2 trained staff. They're going to be fairly more competent, able to check and look for signs. They're not going to be to the same capability as we are. Obviously, we work in this job, but they'll have the awareness and the knowledge to be able to spot signs and work towards helping you with the treatments. You might need further technical support if you need to escalate issues. If it's a big issue, let's say you've taken a new client, it's got a mouse infestation and it's coming into the production areas, you may need to go all the way up to the top level technical teams and discuss with them as a site-wide approach. So it could be isolating sections of a building, it could be massive capex funds to repair parts of the factory. Whatever it may be, you may need to escalate. So you can also adapt your controls to the situation you are in. So I know a lot of factories, if you've had them for a long time, the controls could be in the same space. They could be the same monitors that have been there for 20 years. I like to change things about, modernize it, or make it more my own. But in a treatment, you can always do the same thing, which we've touched on previously today. So you could be using multi-trap boxes. You could be using more tall-shaped traps. Obviously, you've got your standards, so like your AF traps, which can still work, but you might want to try changing it about, seeing what works best. You can also go into wall cavities. So you can drill into a metal cladding, get into the wall cavity and put controls in there, whether that be traps, rodenticide, tracking powder, whatever you fancy putting in there. I would also recommend putting down tracking powder around your monitors, just so you can see if the mouse is coming in or they're avoiding it, they're going up to it and turning around. That way you can assess what your situation is, what you're dealing with, and you can adapt your treatment as you progress. So your follow-up procedure must always be risk assessment based, but you may also have specification needs. I don't know how many people have M&S as an auditor for them, but an M&S side, so if you get a rodent inside, it's 48-hour follow-ups until you've got free or clear visits. For everyone else, to my knowledge, it's pretty much risk assessment based, but make sure that risk assessment is appropriate to where you are. So if it's in a food manufacturing environment, if you're in an area with open food product, you're going to want to be there at least every other day, at least in my opinion, if the risk is that high. If it's in a warehouse, you want to be back at, I would say, 2-3 times a week, but you want to be getting back regularly enough to ensure that your treatment is working and also that damage isn't being occurred to the stock in the process. But you can also ask your clients to support. So like I touched on before, having your client staff check, looking around between your visits. So that way you've got a real day-by-day case of what's going on. It can help optimize your treatment strategy and how you can approach the issue with more accuracy. Always assess it based on risk to product and to people, but the product is what's going to affect your client and could ultimately affect your contract with your client. So talk to your client, always talk to your clients, regardless of who it is, but particularly in a food manufacturing environment, because if you've got a rodent inside, it's going to be news everywhere, particularly in the management level. So whoever it is who's answering to it, whoever your contact is, if they've got to go to their boss and explain it to them, you want to make sure they know exactly what's going on. But they can also help make your job easier. They can improve access. So if you're going into a roof space and there's no ladders, they could get ladders fitted. They could probably get done pretty sharpish as well for you. They could improve hygiene in the area, get cleaning done more quickly. They could divert more resources into keeping the area in a more maintained and suitable fashion. They could also check the monitors, as we've discussed already. That could include going into the boxes itself. They could be checking UV points with UV torch. They could also be checking, just in general, looking around for smear marks, tracking marks, anything to suggest there's been a rodent there. And that would help you inform your decision as you move on into your treatments. And that could go on for days, weeks, however long they're willing to do it for you. And as long as you guys are working collaboratively, that should help optimize your treatment process. Then you've also got your IPM modifications. So a lot of factories have their setup. You go in, you get your contract, you set up the site, and that's it. But whenever a rodent gets in, that's ultimately able to test how your monitor placements and how your IPM strategy is working. So if they've been able to get in, doesn't necessarily matter how, but they've been able to get in, how far they've gotten into your factory. They're coming through the warehouse, have they been able to get past your controls in place? In which case, you guys want to look at how your controls are. Do they need changing? Do you want to switch things up? So going back to box shyness, you might want to change the type of box, the material it's made from if you can, or the shape. I'm experimenting with tunnel traps at the moment. It seems to work quite well. You could change pretty much any facet to it if you would like. You could move them about to different locations, perhaps not necessarily straight away, but you can look at moving their locations to more advantageous positions, particularly if it's an old contract and the building's been changed since it was set up, just to make sure everything is as optimal as possible. You could also put things like baits in it, non-toxic baits, attractant lures you can get, which come in a tube and you can just paste it into the trap itself to see if it increases the efficacy, the effectiveness of the trap. You also want to reassess your risk assessment. Now, sometimes a mouse getting in is just a mouse getting in. and it doesn't necessarily warrant a change to your pest risk assessment, but it happens more than once, or it's happening in a particular way for a particular set of unfortunate circumstances, you may want to consider adapting your pest risk assessment to reflect that. And then you can go back to your client and say, this is the situation, this is your risk assessment. What can we do to improve it? Can we look at maybe putting more monitors in certain areas, or can we look at focusing on proofing works in this area of the factory? Can we look at improving hygiene or any manner of factors that are affecting the risk of the situation? Could the client benefit from any additional services here? Increased visits? Is it a problem outside? Do they need more proofing work? Do you need to come in and do a proofing inspection where you focus purely on the building structure, any kind of gaps, anything that could be exploited? Do you need to look deeper into the factory's schematics and how it's being built? Is there any void spaces you don't know about? Cavities, wall cavities, if you need to drill holes to get inspection points in, that's the time to discuss it. I find factories tend to be more responsive when they're in a position of having an issue because they know about it. So you could get your extra internal monitors put in, get the proofing work done, and get your hygiene up to scratch. All these different factors can all play a role, not just in dealing with the incident at hand, but the long-term protection of the factory from whatever pest risk they may be experiencing. And then you've got ending your treatments. So once you've treated your infestation, let's say one mouse came in, you've got it in a box and it's dead, or it's an infestation and you brought it down and it's sorted out. You've got various factors you need to think about afterwards. So one, has it been actually resolved? How do you know it's resolved? Can you demonstrate that it's been resolved? So is it, say, 2, 3, 4 follow-ups with nothing being found and there's nowhere else anything could be? Or have you just came in and it's clear, in which case you might want to follow up again and then again just to make sure everything's clear? Can your IPM model be optimized in the area, which is again from the previous slide? Could you adapt anything in that area, so let's say a warehouse or production area, to make it more pest proof or to increase the safeguards in place? In some areas, you can't do much. So I believe it's Tesco that don't allow monitors in production areas. But if that is a situation you've got, then you're going to have to deal with it in a different way. It could be in the corridors outside production areas. You could be focusing on the voids, or again, proofing and environmental factors that you might want to look at paying more attention to. Do they need any more pest management support in any way? Do they need proofing reports? Do they need support showing them where cleaning issues are going wrong? Do they need automatic doors? Do they need somebody checking that doors are being kept closed? Sometimes it's easy to tell a manager to keep the doors closed, but the people who are opening the doors might not necessarily know or listen to it. And just talk to your clients, basically. Talk to your clients throughout the whole process, no matter how bad or how big it is. Talk to them, keep them aware, and they'll appreciate that. And it will also help you in the long run. And that's it. Any questions?
Thank you very much. No, really good talk. Thank you for that. And I think it's nice for those who don't do a lot of work in food factories to sort of know there can be like takeaways, just with lots more moving parts and a lot more things to jump through. I do like your bit about talking to customers. We had a pigeons that kept turning up in a factory. We managed to lock it down to a particular shift, which was always the culprit to the letting pigeons into the bakery, which was quite fun.
Yeah, I've done a similar thing with cockroaches before.
You've got a few questions, and hopefully we'll get a few more come up.
I like them too.
Do you have a particular recommendation of how you use your tracking dust?
Okay, I tend to go obviously against the wall, so go sticking out along, check for walking along the edges. I also, if I see a hole or a gap in the wall, I do tend to just throw a load onto it to see if anything comes out. Sometimes when I'm feeling extra fancy, I'll put hazard tape around it to try and remind stuff not to go and destroy it. Doesn't work half the time, but it's the effort that counts. But I tend to stick it just against the wall going out.
Do you alternate the colours particularly as well, like between different infestations, or do you tend to sort of put the dust down at the end of the treatment, like wipe it up, or do you leave it down for a bit, sort of?
My policy, my informal policy, I should say, is tends to leave all controls except for rodenticides in place until the next routine, because that could be, say, 2, 3, 4 weeks away. That way, if anything is still there and we've missed it, there's a whole 4 weeks of this extra control in place. And once that's been cleared, I'll seek to remove the tracking powder and all the controls out of the way. I tend to do wipe out any tracking points because I don't want old colorations getting in the way of future treatments. It has happened before when I've gone in to do a treatment and it turns out it's just tracks found from a previous incident somebody coming down. So it's something that I would do.
Wonderful. Yeah, I think that's super important to make sure you're wiping stuff at the end of a treatment, because if a auditor was to find that, then they would essentially mandate your follow-up procedure, which is going to be a minimum of 4 visits for an M&S.
Yeah.
Waitrose, if you have the pleasure of servicing Waitrose sites. Had a comment from Mike here saying it can be very hard to get clients to conform with like what our standard of hygiene is. And I'm sure a lot of people disagree. How do you, outside of just talking to your customer, how would you sort of create like a visual? This is why we need you to tidy up. I always used to use the 4 grams ultimately. How big's a pasty basically, and how many mice could that feed? Have you got sort of any tips and tricks of how you can help people sort of when they're speaking to QAs and stuff about where the hygiene isn't great and why they need to improve it?
So pictures are always a good one for starters. I tend to physically take the client with me. For most of my inspections, I'll have somebody in the site contact team who I will show them the issue. And if there is an issue going off, I will show them where the issue is and show them how that is the root cause of said issue. In terms of dealing with natural infestation, I would likely do the same. I mean, I would physically show, look, this is here, they can eat this. If there's teeth marks on it, brilliant, because it kind of proves the point for me. But that's what I would seek to do. I would point out that rodenticides don't taste as nice as food, from what I gather. So if you've got a nicer, more tasty alternative to rodenticide, they're not going to go for debate.
We've had another question here around if you have resistance in a food factory, so you're already limited anyway from a toolbox standpoint. So what do you tend to go to if you're sort of either having behavioral resistance in a food factory? Have you got sort of any particular tips and tricks that people might be able to use?
I would say take your specification and then go wild with it. So any kind, so if it's box shyness, get every kind of different box you can get and put them all out. With mice, you have the advantage of you do need to have a lot of different controls in place anyway. So you might as well try lots of different types and try that out. So that first call out visit, spend as much time as you can putting as many different types in, seeing what works best and what doesn't. If it's rodenticide resistance, you could look at checking the active ingredient. Make sure you can find another rodenticide that doesn't interact or interfere with that that rodenticide and try that. Change your formulations within allowance. Obviously, grain bait is a no-no, but if it's something that can be sealed in a locked box, for example, try it. You could always change the environment around the room. So maybe if you've got a cardboard box or something, or a cardboard sheet, you could put that around the box, try and hide the fact that it's there. Just try and mess with the environment as much as you can to try and make it as difficult for them to spot and avoid whatever monster it is you're going for.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So you touched a little bit there on grain rodenticides not being able to be used in food factories at all. Are there any specifications where grain bakes can be used that you're aware of?
To my knowledge, I don't believe you can just go ahead and use it in an area with open product. I don't think it's completely banned in places like voids and spaces like that. I think as long as there's no risk to the open product, you're fine. I would just always try and if you don't need to, don't use it because it's a bit more of a risky one. If it spills, it can go all over. If you're in a wall cavity and you accidentally spill it and it gets into the wall cavity, where does it go? That's my personal preference because I don't want to cause a recall.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially if you're in grain bake, you started to get SPI damage because there was a recall, wasn't there, of a particular type of stuffing at the end of last year. And I believe that was an SPI recall there as well, wasn't it? So I don't want to accidentally cause a problem.
No,
So this is an opinion that we have as well. So a lot of time, the infestation isn't the problem, it's the client.
I think you have to work with your client in whatever way they are. If they're more responsive, brilliant. If they're less responsive, sometimes you just have to be blunt and say it's going to cause you problems. And if you don't sort it and do what this, and this, then you're going to get that, and you don't want that because it's going to cause you problems in your audits. I think you've got to be quite diplomatic, depending on who your client is and how much they particularly want to be involved in the problem. In a food manufacturing environment where there is food available, you can't do a treatment that easily without your client support. So even if you have to use a bit of a blunt instrument and tell them it's going to cause them more problems, then it's up to them to do. But do everything you can and be nice and hope they like you enough to help you.
So we have our last question so far, unless any more come in. So, with regards to the tracking dust, obviously, we talk about ingrained. Typically, any sort of loose products, whether they be rodenticide or tracking and monitoring, we obviously have to deal with contamination issues as well, off the back of that as well. And the question comes around using non-toxic lures due to contamination, allergens as well. I know that's quite a big one. I believe Sainsbury's has a fairly strict allergen contamination document as well. So, with us moving purely into environmental sort of solutions, should we be reducing our reliance on pesticides in food factories whilst trying to sort of deal with all their health and safety and policies and food safety policies as well?
Well, I think even if you take it just from a crew standpoint, keeping rodenticides to a minimum is advantageous, purely because at the end of the day, it is a chemical. It's an anticoagulant rodenticide. It can harm people just as much as rodents. I think if you can get away with physical monitors being sufficient, okay. If you do have active problems, then you're going to need to potentially look at having rodenticides in permanently, in which case, just make it very clear to your clients. You keep it in places where it's not going to risk contamination, and that should be sufficient. Maybe look at a risk assessment. We have risk assessments for cavities, and I like to make sure that they are particularly secure and not going to risk getting into any kind of food open product area.
Awesome. And have you found yourselves moving more? So, sort of non-toxic monitoring, it seemed to me was sort of the trend many years ago. Are you finding us now moving to actually people having more traps installed sort of on more of a permanent basis as opposed to just a sort of control?
I don't know from other company positions. Obviously, my experience has been with precision. We go for traps predominantly because with a non-toxic monitor, a mouse could eat it and disappear. And then if it's only a weekly trap check system, it could be gone all week. So actually, the picture I showed in the PowerPoint with the box shy mice, that building was a warehouse that was joined to another warehouse that had non-toxic monitors in there. And they had mouse issues, but they weren't addressed. But the mice were able to eat the non-toxic, so allowed them to breathe so rapidly. It also created box shyness, which made my job a little bit harder, but more fun. I'll give it that. We tend to go for traps. It would be my personal choice because if you're going to catch a mouse, you might as well deal with it there and then. Um, I suspect probably, but I don't know the industry's move from that.
I think that could be quite an interesting discussion point. I just want to say thank you again for joining us today. A really good talk. Glad to have you on. And yeah, hopefully hear from you again soon.
No worries. Thank you very much.